Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Rood. So in this show, we're going to talk about the Aberfeldy Estate Regeneration Master Plan. Some people call it regeneration, other people call it social cleansing. We're going to talk about that, and then moving on, we're going to talk about Poplar HARCA, their finances, etc., who are leading the Aberfeldy Estate Regeneration, and some of the choice and some speculation about why they're making certain choices. And then we're going to move on to school closures and school rebuilding programs. So there has been population shifts in the borough, which has meant that certain schools are earmarked for closure, whereas other schools are expanding or new schools are happening. There's also been some debate about the playing fields as well, which chimes into other conversations we've had earlier on the program. And finally, I've just been told the overview and scrutiny committee meeting on Liveable Streets, the papers have been published. We haven't had a chance to read them, but we'll try to discuss that. So we're going to go straight into break. After the break, we're going to discuss the Aberfeldy Regeneration Plan. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this show, we've had sort of like a dramatic turn of events. We were going to have someone from the Save Aberfeldy Estate campaign coming on to talk about their campaign, as well as there's a petition online. But I just got a phone call a few minutes ago where that person has been put under pressure not to go public with the issues, but I had a long conversation. They have given talking points, and they couldn't find anyone to come on, but they still want those issues discussed. So I'm gonna, Andrew, what do you make of this kind of last minute? Seems like it's a very politically contentious issue. It looks like this estate regeneration on the Aberfeldy, and possibly an election issue as well.
Well, I mean, estate regenerations are always politically difficult. I mean, some of the estate regenerations going on in like Southwark, for example, have been major talking points for years. So these are can be very politically sensitive because they're about people's homes and about demolishing homes, and then the whole anxiety about people being forced out of their homes as well, which I don't think necessarily is the case in this particular example. But, they are difficult subjects because, your home is a very emotive subject. So, and it is a complex scheme as well, because I kind of, having read the petition, I think they've made one mistake, but I can understand why they made that mistake in the petition, because I got confused about a couple of points as well.
So I think the main bugbear is the closure of this underpass of a road, which is going to be, but I think cars are going to be barred from it. So it's not necessarily a closure. It's going to be pedestrianized for bikes and for pedestrians. So just to give people just an understanding where the Aberfeldy is. So the Aberfeldy is sort of like on the edge of Tower Hamlets. It's kind of like on the border, bordering the Lee River, and to get there you have to go underneath the A12. So if you can imagine, you come out of the tunnel and you straight onto the A12, and to get, it's on the other side, on the eastern side of the A12, the Tower Hamlets side of it. So it's an old estate, mainly owned by Poplar HARCA. There's been a lot of controversy around that estate, around the regeneration, and it seems like the controversy is going. And I think one of the issues that the residents had was there was poor consultation as regards to this master plan, what that actually means. Not all residents were consulted. That's the issue. With the consultation just primarily focusing on houses that are being demolished as part of the regen, little or no consultation about the wider master plan and the impact that it has. And talking to the campaigners, they're saying, look, once a master plan is passed, then Poplar HARCA get the outline planning permission through, and it goes out of control. For them, it's an issue that this is public land. It's been transferred to HARCA for public purposes, and what they don't understand is why the affordable housing on it is so small. They're claiming that it's 35% that is being proposed. If the land is given free, why is it so low? Whereas a normal developer would have to pay for the land and then be entitled to 35%, whereas this land has been given for free, yet the social housing is really low. And there's issues about affordable as well. What does that affordable, what does it actually mean? Is it the 80% of market rate? Then it's not affordable. And so there's all these issues. It seems like I think the main anxiety is that it seems like the local community seems like being pushed out. The current makeup is being pushed out to allow, say, Poplar HARCA and their venture partner to maximize the land value. It's the same old story. We've seen it on the island. We've hearing it on the city fringe as well. Seems like, what kind of communities do we want? Do we want to homogenize the same communities, or do we want sort of like diverse, resilient communities? That is the debate, and it seems like the debate isn't happening. It seems like the wall is being pulled over people's eyes. Andrew, over to you. I know when I discussed it with you, you were looking at an old copy of the master.
So it's a new copy. It's actually the I got this. Sorry, I'm trying to center this.
Yeah.
Document about a month ago. So there was a councillor briefing session about the Aberfeldy Master Plan, and I've kind of kept a watching brief on what's happening, because as I told them, I was concerned that we don't repeat mistakes on the Aberfeldy that were made in the past in Blackwall and the Isle of Dogs. And I wanted to see evidence that they'd learned from some of those mistakes. So I think there was some confusion about what's happening with the Abbots Road underpass, which is the existing road entrance on the northern side. So they are going to, convert that into a cycle and pedestrian access. It looks actually quite nice in the pictures, but they will build, they're saying, according to this, a new vehicle access route from the A12 onto Abbots Road. Will be built to the north of the existing underpass to maintain access for car users and for buses as well. So I think there will be traffic through, and that's one of the things we did ask about in that council briefing. So cars will be able to sort of drive through, even if you might not want people running through that area. But clearly it's a huge increase in infrastructure, a huge increase in density for that area. There's not that many people who live there today, so it's going to be quite a dramatic increase. So I had lots of questions about, the infrastructure is going to be built to support this. And the important point is it's not just Poplar HARCA and Echo World, who are their partners, building in this area. You've got the Poplar Gas Works with a major scheme coming forward on that site. You've then got FEC, who are developing an old site there as well. So there's actually five major developments happening in that general area. So the risk will be is that, yes, you might have a master plan for the Aberfeldy, but not for everything else. And the issue about that area, it has the worst public transport accessibility levels in the whole of Tower Hamlets in terms of people's access to public transport within 10 minutes. Walking distances, it's the lowest in parts of that area. And to get access to public transport, there's only one bus today. I think the 309, it's a single decker. And then everything else you have to walk, underneath or across some pretty major roads. So that's the major concern for that area, is how all of these people will be able to live in this area and what the infrastructure will be built to support that growth.
It seems like it might be an election issue. I know it's causing issues in the local Labour Party there, where councillors are being asked to publicly oppose the master plan or asked for changes to it. It's also had the opposition there, the former opposition councillor who lives on the Aberfeldy estate. He's been campaigning, and it's been timetabled to be adopted at cabinet in November. That's what I've been told, after the election. So it seems like it's going to be an issue that's going to rumble on in terms of the election. I did ask the campaigners what is their plan. They're saying, look, we're going door to door, collecting signatures. This is just the parting shot across the bow. See if Poplar HARCA or the council are serious about sitting down, incorporating people's views. If not, then it might be an election issue. Andrew, your thoughts on that in terms of this becoming an election issue? Do you see this sort of like coalescing with other parts of the borough, with overdevelopment as an issue to become a major election issue? Because that hasn't been the case previously in elections, where overdevelopment hasn't come to the forefront. Whereas here we're seeing, just before the election, a push from various parts saying enough is enough. Then there must be a different way of doing things.
Yes, I think part of the opposition may also come not from the Poplar HARCA bits of Aberfeldy, but there's actually a lot of people who live in Aberfeldy outside of the Poplar HARCA area, and I'm less clear on how they were consulted. What I do know is the two people that I met, one was the architect, or worked for the architects, the other one worked for Poplar HARCA. They've been working on this scheme for 10 years. So this has been 10 years in the process. And I think one of the problems that we've had historically is like, people just get tired of consultations because like nothing happens. But having said that, I mean, parts of this master plan have been built already. So all the southern bits of the Aberfeldy have already been developed. So this is kind of the second phase. But my main, and actually I was reasonably happy with what was presented and the answers that they gave. They had thought about youth violence, for example. So I don't have huge issues about that. My main concerns are still about infrastructure, because I've got issues on the Isle of Dogs. And to give you one example, that there's this map actually, which is on my fridge, which I should have got, which shows where the bridges should be built across the River Lee. And one of the reasons for those bridges is to improve access to the DLR on the other side of the river. But nothing has happened with those bridges. So the mistake made on the Isle of Dogs is they built lots of buildings, and then the infrastructure either hasn't happened or is following late, or is arriving in bridges again on South Dock, hasn't been built yet, even though the buildings are now filling with people. And my concern is exactly the same thing happens again, that the infrastructure isn't built quickly enough to support this growth. And that definitely should be an election issue. But how you consult people, which we'll talk about in Liveable Streets. So I think those are kind of, and parking would be, that's the other issue I mentioned, will be a major issue in that area, because you'll have lots of people and no increase in parking.
I've spoke to the campaigners saying, look, how did people get in touch? They're saying, look, we've got to change.org. We'll be updating people on that. I did point them towards the Carpenter estate, so like a resident-led estate regeneration plan, pointing them towards, say, planning forums, and they would plan. So they're saying everything's on the table, but they just want to be heard. It just seems like they've been ignored. Consultation hasn't been done. There was an issue about the school as well, where the playing fields were going to disappear, and then they reappeared again after so like people spotted that. So it just seems like they're being roughshod. And I think people are concerned about what happened at Chris Street, where estates have been decanted. Then all of a sudden, public land is basically being used for mainly private development. And it just question, is Poplar HARCA a housing association, just like many other housing associations? Are they housing associations, not for profit, or are they property developers? And that is the question that more and more people are talking about. So we're going to come into a break. After the break, we're going to talk about the finances, probably some of the reasons, look into why, say, Poplar HARCA or other housing associations are slowly becoming housing developers rather than managing social housing stock, and the pressure on housing associations like Poplar HARCA in terms of their finances. So we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to have a discussion about Poplar HARCA's finances and possible reasons as to their approach to estate regeneration. Hi, welcome back to the Weekly Policy Show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Rood. So in this section, we're going to follow on from our discussion about the Aberfeldy, because Aberfeldy is not the only estate that's being regenerated by Poplar HARCA. You've got the Teviot. The people have already received letters about the Teviot. You've got Stradley Walk, which is sort of like Bromley by Bow area. There's discussion about that, especially the compulsory purchase element of it, or the council, Tower Hamlets Council part of it, etc. There's been a lot of discussions, especially within the Tower Hamlets Labour Party, about the timing of those deals, especially in terms of the trigger ballot within the local Labour Party for the mayoralty. But it seemed like HARCA and then Chris Street as well, which was really, really contentious just before the election, and was put on hold until after the election before it was pushed through. And it seems like, is HARCA becoming a property developer? And it does ask questions about the original approach to stock transfers in Tower Hamlets, where council officers went to the council saying this is a good way, a cheap way of renovating housing stock. All these housing associations are going to be local. They're going to be locally answerable. And now, instead of managing housing stock, it just seems like HARCA have become a property developer, with sort of like getting the value out of land that's been given virtually free. I think Chris Street was given for £1. But I know for a fact that and then there's other estates that they control. So like the Burdett Estate, which is on my ward, which a lot of people think after the Teviot, Poplar HARCA are going to come down on the Burdett Estate, and the West Lansbury Estate, which is the Miah. So there's a lot of concerns. Andrew, how do we have checks and balances on this, especially when it's Tower Hamlets Council land, public land, that was given over to these entities?
Well, I mean, to answer your earlier question, is actually they're meant to be both. They're meant to be property developers and to look after existing homes. And those are two very different skill sets. And I've seen some housing associations who are good property developers, but they're not good at looking after homes, and then vice versa. And it's also because government have put them under a lot of pressure. So government are basically telling housing associations is that, you know, we need more properties in the United Kingdom. You own lots of land, especially in places like London. So we want to see you develop more homes. The government then give the Mayor of London money, and the Mayor of London then allocates that money for new affordable housing. So some of it goes to the local authorities, like Newham got a lot of money, but also housing associations. So Poplar HARCA has got money from the Mayor of London, from government, to actually deliver more affordable housing as well. And that's, it's a very difficult balancing act to kind of play between the two. And the other problem we've got, some of these estates are getting old. They're not necessarily good quality homes anymore. So there is a real issue about some of these homes, there is definitely some homes I know of in the Isle of Dogs. I would have knocked them down 10 years ago because they're not good places to live in. But how do you then pay for it? And the way it works currently is you pay for it by also building lots of new private homes. And in the case of Aberfeldy, Poplar HARCA have got a joint venture with Echo World, who are a Malaysian-based company. And obviously they've got some financial agreement as to who's going to put in what. So yes, a private company will be making profit out of this, but the reason why they do that is because it's the way of actually getting these new homes built to replace existing homes, which are not fit for the 21st century. But then obviously you need lots of new homes to pay for that, which does mean a big increase in the density of those estates. And in some cases, I think it works well. I mean, there's some developments on the Isle of Dogs where, people voted for it, and And actually, I've been inside one of those new homes, and I would live there. I'll be very happy to live in that new social rent new social rent apartment that was built as part of this estate regeneration. It was actually quite nice, but we need to do that with residents, and to be fair to Poplar HARCA, they've had ballots, and I think the important thing is that people need to have a ballot. They need to have a choice in this. There may be issues about how balanced the information is that people get, and I know there are definitely questions about the option of maintenance and how much that costs, because I think sometimes the information is perhaps weighted more like that. But in all of these cases, Poplar HARCA have had ballots, and people have voted for these estate regenerations. There hasn't always been, there's been other examples in London, especially recently, where some of these ballots have been lost. But certainly in Tower Hamlets, all the recent ballots I'm aware of have all been won by the housing associations, and people have agreed to redevelopment of their homes for a bunch of different reasons.
So it seems like all the forces are pushing, say, housing associations or Tower Hamlets Council or private property owners to maximize their land value. But say we politically or as a community or democratically, people would want, say, diverse or resilient communities. They like the mix. How do we square the circle, Andrew? How do we sort of like put these checks and balances in a democratic manner? Can you put checks and balances on, say, these sort of like prevailing international sort of like market forces? Because it's interesting that HARCA have teamed up with a Malaysian company, which basically, I'm assuming they're going to be marketed abroad, say in Hong Kong or Malaysia. There are issues of capital control in certain Southeast Asian countries, and buying properties is a way around those capital control. So over to you, Andrew. Have you thought about these issues?
Yeah. Because the other issue is it's been quite fashionable in recent months to talk about not demolishing buildings at all, but kind of just refitting them. So from a carbon point of view, it's actually not good from a climate change point of view to knock a building down and then build a big new building with lots of concrete in it, because that's not good from a climate change point of view. So there's also an argument about trying to refit existing buildings, but it all comes back to money and who's going to pay for it. And yes, the government have given some money. I think it's £8.6 billion across the UK. But if you divide that by the cost of building a new home in London, which is about £300,000-400,000, it doesn't buy you a lot of properties. So what they're trying to do is sort of encourage sort of more development by kind of just making things profitable enough to be worth doing. But in all of those cases, it's still about building new homes, because again, the target from government and from the Mayor of London is we need more new homes in London. And one of the ways of delivering that is on council estates, either via the infill, which is what the council are doing, or estate regeneration, because there's not much other land available in London for major development. And that comes back to the role of London immigration, because again, a lot of the demand for new homes in Tower Hamlets is coming from people coming from abroad and doing jobs in London. Is that something we want to continue? And I think the answer broadly is yes. So it does raise, and the other point, a particular bugbear of mine, we have the green belt in London. So London, not allowed to grow. London has to stay like that, and you can't build in that area. So that means the only option is kind of going up. If we didn't have a green belt, more like German cities, and the cities would kind of grow outwards, and there would be less pressure on land that we've got. So one of the consequences of the green belt is that yes, you have to build on existing land within London and therefore build upwards. But I think to answer your question, I think the important point is to make sure that residents are involved as much as possible in the process. And there's some really good examples of where residents are involved in co-creation. Residents help pick the architect. So, it's not the developer who just picks the architect. It's actually done with residents, so that, they pick an architect who will then work with residents. And I think that's part of the answer, is make sure they've got the ballot, make sure they've got balanced information, and make sure they're actually actively involved. in the design of these new homes, because I'm aware of an example on the Isle of Dogs, where they were involved in the selection of kitchens and the design of the windows, and that's the example of the home that I talked about that I would be quite happy to live there. And I think one of the reasons is because it's well designed and it works in part because residents were involved in the process.
Well, before I came on the show, I was doing a bit of reading about whether the Equalities Act has an impact in terms of planning law. And one of the interesting case laws is that you have to give due regard in terms of your pros, and the threshold is really, really low. An issue doesn't have to arise. You just have to, if there's a possibility of an issue arising, you have to go through that. It seems like that hasn't filtered through. When I was reading the case law, etc., on it, and the advice, it seemed like this hasn't filtered through the way we do our consultations, the approach, the top-down approach. There isn't that consideration of vulnerable residents, and its protective characteristics is a wide variety of protective characteristics, from gender, ethnicity to age as well, and disability as well. And it just doesn't seem like our planning or our approach to planning or regeneration, state regeneration, has caught up with that. And I still remember the Brick Lane decision when they said, "Oh, it's got nothing to do with planning law," but it has a bite. When are we going to catch up to have these kind of thinking or due regard, so to speak?
So I think it very much depends on the developer and their team as to how proactive they are on some of these issues. So I've talked to some good developers who are fully conscious of these issues and also think deeply about these issues as well, about how to engage people. And there's also developers out there, we delivered a leaflet, job done, that's all we kind of need to do. So it is about how do you kind of engage people. And I think certainly the council processes are, we don't really like to talk to people. We have to do it. I remember sort of like public consultation events that were barely advertised. So, hardly anybody turned up. And I think we just need to find, and that's the other reason why I'm so keen on like 3D models, because a lot of the problem is a lot of these consultations kind of very dry and a bit boring. I mean, to be fair to the Aberfeldy one, it's a bit better because there's some nice pictures in there with some nice diagrams. I think that is better. But, I think the more visual it is, the better. Again, coming back to the example in the Isle of Dogs, which worked well, they had a centre. There was a porta cabin in the car park, and you would go in there, and they had all the different window styles and the sort of kitchen designs, so you could actually see what the different options were, and you could touch them and feel them. And I thought that was a good example about how you could, bring people forward, because they could just walk into the car park and have a look at the designs and then feedback to people as to what they thought. And if they were, if they're busy, because that place was open on a regular basis, well, if they didn't go that week, well, they could go the following week, rather than just having these events like, on one Saturday afternoon and that's it. If you miss it, then it's too late.
So Shrap, I think it looks like this is going to be an election issue. I think, unfortunately, Poplar HARCA again, it looks like it's going to be a political football, as they were, Chris Street. But there are questions that need to be asked about Poplar HARCA. They have received millions of pounds from Tower Hamlets Council in terms of us buying housing stock, really old housing stock, a lot of it on Miah Ward, which I've knocked on, and I was kind of surprised why those properties are empty, and then I realised that they were the ones that they sold to Tower Hamlets Council. Andrew, do you see those kind of? Do you see any other questions arising? Because it seems like it's unfortunate for the organisation, but it seems like they're always election time. They're a good political football to keep around.
which is unfortunate, because some of these issues are serious and need to be dealt with over a longer time span than an election campaign. But Poplar HARCA did receive £53 million at Tower Hamlets Council money. You said it's old stock. I assume that, but I don't know, because we never had any information about what was bought. We know we had to spend more money in repairs and maintenance than we originally budgeted for, which suggests that this was old stuff. But there's been no reports about that, so there's a lot of uncertainty where that money went, which doesn't help with some of this stuff if we lack transparency.
Well, it looks like it's an issue that's going to rumble. If people are interested, there is a change.org petition out there. I will provide a link to our show with it, with the petition. Get in touch is something to watch out for, but it looks like it's an issue that's going to rumble on. I think it's an issue. I think overdevelopment, the role of housing association, looks like this. It's an issue that's going to come into the election. So after the break, we're talking about urban regeneration development. We're going to talk about the issues around school. There's a lot of schools that are earmarked for closure. Some schools are earmarked for expansion or rebuild, and there's some new schools that are going to be created. And we're going to just talk about some of the issues around that. So join us after the break. After the break, we're going to just talk about the issues of schools in Tower Hamlets, closure and rebuild and new schools. Hi, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Root. In this section, we're going to talk about a contentious issue in a lot of areas, school closures, rebuilding of schools, and possibly new schools. And due to various demographic shifts, unanticipated in some parts, we're seeing schools being closed and also a demand for new schools. So, Andrew, you've been keeping a close eye on it. I know you were involved in the Rains Foundation when that was earmarked for closure, and a lot of people were upset about that. What they saw was a viable school, deliberately, they feel, was being sort of like closed down and not given a chance. Do you want to talk us through this whole issue in the borough?
Yeah, so we have this really weird situation in Tower Hamlets where we are closing schools and building or having built for us new schools. So to give you some idea of the closures, we just talked about Rains, but Cherry Trees Primary School closed in August of this year. Cllr closed in August of this year. Guardian Angels closed last year. And then St. Matthias, I think, closed last year as well. So one of the difficulties that the Tower Hamlets Council have now got is, what do we do with that land? Do we sell it? Because then it brings in money, which we always need money. Or do we keep some of that land just in case, in 10, 20 years time, actually we have a child boom and we need more primary school capacity? Because basically what's happened in the west of Tower Hamlets is basically women are, having less children, and therefore there's less demand for primary school places. But then on the other side, we're building new secondary schools. So there's a new secondary school in Wapping being built as we speak. And then on the Isle of Dogs, we are building, there's a new school being built by Canary Wharf Group, a primary school, and there's others in the planning system as well, because the population of the Isle of Dogs is going up. So even though the number of children per woman may also be low, there's more women, and therefore we need more schools. And we've kind of gone through this before. That I was sort of aware, like in the 1990s, we closed a bunch of schools. And I think some of them, I may be wrong about this, might have then reopened or might have been needed in the future. So I think what the council are trying to do is to try and keep some of that land for other educational use or other council use, so that if we do need it back in 10 or 20 years' time, that we've got the capacity. And it also comes back to how attractive Tower Hamlets is as a place for families. And the answer is right now it seems to be not very attractive, because the other issue we've got is because of Brexit. So Brexit had an impact on the Catholic schools. So lots of Polish families left, for example. So that caused a decline in the Catholic schools. More recently, working from home, people moving out of London. So there's been a 2.5% reduction in the primary school intake this September compared to, I think, previous years, which is less. I think London as a whole, I think, lost 6.5%. So actually we didn't lose as many as other places, but it's still a decline. So, Do we want families to stay in Tower Hamlets? Do we want to encourage them? Or are we quite happy with that process for families to leave? Once you've got kids, then you move out of London. As a lot of my friends, a lot of former Conservative councillors, the reason why they stopped being councillors is because they had children and then they left Tower Hamlets because of those children. So is that something that we want to stop or not? But in the meantime, so on next week's cabinet meeting, there's some important decisions coming for four. So there are 4 schools. For 2 of those schools, we don't own the whole school site because some of these schools are originally religious. So the church, either the Roman Catholic or Church of England, owns part of the site. But we also own parts of those buildings as well. So there's some quite difficult decisions to be made about what we do with some of that land. And as I said, the temptation is to sell some of it. And if I was making a decision, I would also sell some of that land. And also just to mention, and before I forget, because it might be a bit controversial, Cannon Barnet in Aldgate, we're going to do a swap of land to allow an office development to happen. So a developer basically wants to build an office, which is not a bad thing. But the most efficient place to build this would be to take the school playground for Cannon Barnet, but they would then give us land of a similar size as a swap, also next to the school. And I think actually this one probably is okay, because the benefit of this would be is that current playground is next to a main road, and then new playground will be away from the main road. But that's the other issue that's coming up in the cabinet next week, as well as the discussions over the Cannon Barnet primary school playground in Aldgate.
But I think I know the school closures are quite contentious. I know, for example, Cllr Primary School it was a kind of like a centre of the community. It is kind of like on the fringe, and there's people being concerned about that. And I think we need to have a discussion. What kind of Tower Hamlets do we want? Do we want a Tower Hamlets that's just for, say, city workers, young professionals, people just come, sleep there, go out, sort of like restaurants and, say, bars and pubs in the evening, and that's it. And the weekend is sort of like a ghost town, or do we want to keep sort of like a mixture of demographics in Tower Hamlets, sort of like diverse communities and resilient communities? And you see that in America, where they have sort of like entire towns built around a single factory or a single kind of demographic, and then something happens and the entire town just dies, and that's it. The most famous is Flint, Michigan, which used to make steel. Factory closed, and that's it. The town has some of the worst issues in America, including poisoning of their water. That's the lead in their water. That was the latest issue. So we're not having those discussions. It seems like everybody's just kidding themselves, moving along. Oh, how wonderful! Or trying to pass it down the road, these issues. Is that the feeling you're getting, Andrew?
Well, the primary school closures were a kind of good example of the process. So to be fair to the council, I thought they actually did the process quite well. They got a former head teacher in to have these conversations, because the other thing they sort of talked about is kind of like school mergers, and also like changing whether it's reducing the size of schools. So there's also been a reduction in the size of some schools as well. So this head teacher, she talked to all of the governors and the head teachers and the staff to try and come up with something. So rather than sort of, dog eat dog, where, schools are fighting for survival, there was a bit of planning. So I thought that was good, but it was just the schools kind of talking to themselves. It wasn't really this wider debate about, as you said, what kind of Tower Hamlets do we want? Do we want to encourage families? It was kind of accepting the reduction in children as a given. And, do we care about that? I would make an argument that it is unhealthy for a society to have, because what it means is basically your population declines. And there are countries in the world where the populations are declining quite dramatically. And it then raises the question, somebody of 20 years old, who's going to look after them when they're 80 if the number of, the population is declining? I mean, that hasn't been an issue. I mean, the issue for London has been our population is still going up, but that's because of immigration in from other countries. So if that were to stop, is that a good thing that London's population declines? And I would argue sort of, keeping it stable would actually be the right solution, because that makes it much easier for planning, because closing schools, it's difficult, it's expensive. But we're not having those kind of conversations at all. And, what would attract families into the area? Did we want to keep families? And the answer seems to be no, because actually we're quite happy to close those schools, because Tower Hamlets Council has always operated on this kind of idea that we need each school to be full, because that's financially the best thing for that school. So we don't want lots of excess capacity within the system, because that's slightly, so we don't want 4 or 5 primary schools at 80% capacity. We want all the schools to be full. So therefore they will close things down rather than perhaps keep some schools with underutilized, which is not ideal. I'm not going to disagree with that, for the fact, because funding comes on a per pupil basis. The less pupils you have, there are financial consequences for the children, but there's also things that you could do to kind of maybe keep some classrooms kind of empty, and then maybe see in 10 years' time whether you need them or not again, rather than completely closing schools down. So there are things you could do about that, but those aren't the conversations that we're having.
But schools are more, they're sort of like institutions in the community. They seem to anchor community, give a local community its identity as well. And that's what I found fascinating, just campaigning or knocking on doors, how people use their local tool as a school as a reference point, and parents gather around, they talk to each other, and then other forms of activities come around. And I don't think that conversation is happening as to the other value of having a school in a local area. And I have seen, so I used to live in Whitechapel. I've seen that city fringe. There doesn't seem to be an identity. There's no coalition or sense of community there.
Yeah.
There isn't a primary school there. They've had all these massive developments go up, but there isn't a primary school, etc. And that's those social added values of a school are not. I don't see. They're there in the conversation. I don't see anyone thinking about those issues. But it's not all doom and gloom. So we're not just closing schools, we're building new schools, but they're not local authority schools. So Andrew, do you want to go into that? Because we're having more and more free schools,
So what the law says, so this is from 2011, it's about 10 years old now, that if a local authority wants to open a new school, it can't operate it itself as a local authority. This comes out of the whole academy agenda. It was the next logical phase of the academy's program. So what the council can now do is that they can sort of say, we want a new school in that location, want it to be a primary, want it to be of this size. They can also kind of lay out kind of what the ethos is, or if it should offer any kind of specialization. So they can shape what it should be. They then have to put together kind of like a competition document. They then advertise a competition. So they invite bidders in. But it can only come from existing school groups. So the Department of Education have a list of approved school providers. So only those people can respond to that, so I can't do it, can respond to that competition and so say, we want to run this school. So for example, in the Isle of Dogs, the first new school this has ever happened to in 10 years is the Canary Wharf Group built Wood Wharf Primary School, which will open next September. So the competition has started. That's all I know. It's been kept completely secret by the council, but in theory, what will happen is the council will pick one of those bidders to actually operate the school once it opens, and the Department of Education have an oversight role in that process, as well as the Regional Schools Commissioner. So we're basically waiting to find out who will run the Wood Wharf Primary School. But as I said, I know the competition has started, but the rest of that process has been kept quite secret. And I suspect one of the reasons for that is that this is the first time that we have done this ourselves. It's common elsewhere. These competitions have been, done all over the United Kingdom. It's a very well understood process, except not in Tower Hamlets.
It'll be interesting to see who the winner is. But again, the Academy's program, the free school program, has been contentious. I believe it came out of Sweden, where in Sweden they had this sort of like every parent had a voucher and they could choose where they cash that voucher. And on the face of it, educational attainment went up because there was competition, especially in marginalized groups. There's been further studies now which kind of questions that, but that's where the modus operandi came from. Other people believe that it's an ideological attack on sort of like the teaching unions, who seem to be a bastion of a certain type of politics that the current government doesn't like. But again, it's an interesting because I've had friends on both sides of the debate who've worked in different types of schools, so it's an ongoing debate, and it's going. But I believe Tower Hamlets council policy is against academization, but it hasn't been successful so far.
Yeah, but schools are making that choice from themselves. There haven't been that many schools that have gone academy in Tower Hamlets, but some of them have gone. And I probably should state for the record that I've been involved in some free groups, free school groups. And actually, many years ago, I was involved in working with a group of Muslim parents about setting up a Muslim free school in Tower Hamlets, but the Department of Education didn't like us, unfortunately. So,
well, it's an ongoing debate. Let's see what comes out of the competition. Let's see who runs it. Is it going to be the Canary Wharf group?
Can't be them because they're not an approved provider.
Got you.
Yeah.
Good. But let's see who it is. But we're going to go straight into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss the upcoming Monday meeting over in scrutiny on Liveable Streets. There was a lot of flurry on social media about what this meeting's about, why it hasn't been advertised. But there's a bit more clarity now. So we're going to go into a break now. And after the break, we're going to go straight into the Liveable Streets Open Scrutiny Committee meeting on Monday. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew. So in this section, we're going to try to shed some light on this forthcoming Monday over in Scrutiny Committee meeting on Liveable Streets. So some context to the background. Normally papers are published a week in advance of these council meetings. All of a sudden, people only found out about it after, I think, is it Andrew, you tweeted, and then Papu, is it Papu who tweeted?
No, it was Councillor Mohammed Papu who tweeted first,
yeah.
and then the council tweeted.
And but apparently it was advertised quite heavily on pro-Liveable Streets social media forums, so people smelled a rat. Why isn't the agenda being published? What's this all about? And now it's being published. So Andrew, have you had a chance to read or have a glance of what this meeting is going to be about?
Yeah, so it's on Monday night from 6:30. So I'd encourage you to email into the committee or to me, and I can forward it on. But basically, it's a scrutiny challenge session on Liveable Streets. There is now a presentation that was released late this afternoon with kind of an update. So it's very interesting. So there is some stuff in it which I think is good, because basically they talk about the consultation process and about what they're proposing to change. So there's some quite good wording in there. So, for example, feedback has shown that there is a perception from sections of the community that the project is led by a team of external consultants, which is true, because that's actually what was happening. This has led to a lack of trust in the consultation and engagement process from a certain section of the community. Council officers should now take more of a front-facing role. Less reliance on online responses and mailed out surveys. The survey designs need to be made more accessible. More stuff needs to be done in person. So I think what they do seem to have reflected on, reading this very quickly, is the consultation process. What they don't seem to be reflecting on is, in my view, the emergency services responses. So they don't even mention the word emergency services. And for me, that's quite critical. And it kind of implies, so it talks about the 7 schemes underway, what they're kind of doing. And I hadn't realized actually there's still a lot of work to do on some of them. And what it does confirm also, which I think is very interesting, is the reason why the Bow Busgate or Skew Bridge closures hasn't happened yet, because emails have been coming in this afternoon of asking why hasn't happened. It basically says the report, there are concerns from TfL that diverted traffic could have adverse impacts on the wider road network and particularly bus journey times. Modelling is required to verify impacts and allow for the design of mitigation impacts. So basically what it's saying is, if you close those roads, you'll force more traffic onto the main roads, which will basically slow down bus journeys. So what it's basically confirming is that TfL don't think that people will magically stop driving, but basically that, yes, this will just divert the cars elsewhere, and that will have wider impacts on other areas, which is why the Bow stuff hasn't happened. And that's been the argument for some of the other changes as well, is that thinking about the impact on other streets of these changes. In some cases, I think we still need to do them. So like, Wapping, I still think we need to stop rat running through Wapping, but yes, there are definitely impacts on the highway from doing that. So that's a very quick run through of what's in the report. As I said, it's on the council website. And I'll it's probably too late to do it tonight, but tomorrow I'll put this on Twitter and Facebook. And the other very interesting thing about this was the initial advertising about this event on Monday night was only done by the council on Twitter. They didn't put it on their own Facebook page. And one of the things I've talked about before is that the demographics of people who use Twitter is different from the demographics of people who use Facebook, and then different from the people who use WhatsApp. And crudely speaking, is people on Twitter are generally, supportive of livable streets. The people on WhatsApp are not supportive, and people on Facebook are kind of vary depending on which Facebook group you're asking the question in. And that comes back to one of the things that the council do admit is that there are issues with using online consultations, and they need to find a way out of relying too much on online consultations.
But there doesn't seem to be any. They're not talking about the data. It seems like we're sort of like groping ourselves in the dark. But like no one knows who owns the cars, what the car journeys are for, etc. Who's being impacted. Do we need permanent road closures? Do they have an impact on pollution or not? Or are we just shifting pollution, making matters worse? It just are we going a bit ideological here, Andrew? It just seems like
I had a very long meeting with a woman from Germany earlier, and I'm half German, and we were talking about this English thing of kind of doing things based on, I think it's a good idea, and not looking at the data. And because I'm also an accountant by background, so people, when I was working as an accountant, people would tell me stories, and I'd sort of say to them, prove it with the numbers. Is your income actually going up like you say it is? And in some cases, people thought one thing and the numbers were showing something completely different. And yes, that's a good point you just made. There is no data in the presentation. There's no air quality analysis. There's no data about the impacts of diverting traffic where they have done it. There's no vehicle count data. As I said, there's nothing from the emergency services about the impact on their services, because as we've talked about before, last year, emergency services weren't really able to collect that data because their systems weren't able to do it. But that data should be available this year, I'm hoping. It's not in there. So again, it's all kind of we think, except for the consultation where, again, it's we think, but at least I think on the consultation section of the presentation on Monday night, they have reflected on some of the lessons, what went wrong.
But again, just from what you're saying, it just seems like, again, there isn't sort of like a standard or something that we're judging against. So again, so like from a previous conversation, has due regard been given in these consultations? Have due regard been given in terms of our public sector equality? These are sort of like anchors in terms of how we judge our action or audit our action. it seems to be completely absent. It's like I feel like this would be right or that would be. Again, I think this is good rather than these are our duties. Are we fulfilling our duties?
Yeah.
These are the facts on the ground. Are we acting according to those facts? It just seems like a different conversation. How did this come about? Is this something that the chair himself, Councillor Papu, brought onto the agenda, or how did this come about? And who set the questions? Sort of tell the officers this is what we want.
So I mean, it would have probably come out because Ovian Scrutiny a couple of months ago in the summer, we had like an away day where we kind of talked about our top issues that we wanted to focus on, and I'm pretty sure a number of us would have written down livable streets. So in theory, it's come out of that, and clearly it's one of the the biggest council programs that we've got out there. And again, one of the good things in the presentation is it does talk about the budget. This is an expensive program as well. So the existing, I think 7 schemes. I think it's total budget. I think it's about £11 million. So this is a big program. So it's definitely, this is kind of the thing that we should be looking at as Ovian Scrutiny. But the presentation, again, it's kind of only looked. So again, I wasn't involved in setting this presentation up, but I would have suggested, as I just discussed, we need a lot more data about what happened than what's been presented in this. So again, this presentation isn't particularly useful in terms of helping us to think about the issues. Sorry, the total budget is £13.4 million for those. Sorry, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 schemes. The first 9 schemes, and a reminder that large parts of Tower Hamlets, they haven't even started yet. So these 9 schemes are like only the beginning of the process. And the budget is £13.4 million, but they're forecasting to spend in total less than budget. So they're forecasting to spend £11.6 million, which is a lot more money than they're spending on lots of other things in Tower Hamlets right now.
Can members of the public contribute? Is it like cabinet? Can people turn up and say, I want to speak? What's the format of it? Was it we could just observe and yourselves as Open Scrutiny councillors?
So I'll put that on social media tomorrow. But basically, you can ask the chair to speak. You can also email in advance. So there's I think about 3 or 4 emails I've seen today that have come in from people. I'm guessing from the Twitter advertisement that has been advertised, because the emails I've seen have basically been kind of pro livable streets. And that's the point I was making. This wasn't put on Facebook, which would attract I mean, it has been now because people have spotted it from Twitter and now put it on Facebook. And I think I've seen this on WhatsApp as well. You can email in. So again, I'll put some of the email addresses in on the social media. I'll do tomorrow. And you can also watch it online. It will be broadcast on the council webcast. And if you miss it Monday, you can watch it as catch up. And I'll put the links again on social media tomorrow morning.
No problem. So it's something to watch out for. Looks like this debate is going to go on and on. I just hope people learn the lessons. I know there is a review on Liveable Streets. Has that been talked about, this so-called review that's going to go to cabinet with recommendations? Is this part of that, or? That's a
good question. So it doesn't really talk about a review, but some of the data in here, I suspect, will get reused for the cabinet review, especially the sections where they talk about changes to the consultation process. But if I had to guess what the final outcome would be, is I think, from reading this, my guess would be is that Tower Hamlets Council will pretty much continue as they plan, except for that they will make some changes to the consultation process, and that those consultation processes will be more led by council officers rather than PCL, a private company that were doing it before. But other than some of those cosmetic changes at the beginning, and maybe some changes about trying to do more stuff in person, which will be easier now that COVID is less of an issue, it kind of does look like they're pretty much planning to continue as they have done in the past on the other schemes. It doesn't really look like, other than changes to consultation, there's any kind of real rethink about how this all works based on the presentation that they've sent out this afternoon.
Cool. So it's something to watch out for. It's going to be on video. It's going to be recorded, but it looks like Liveable Streets is something that's not going to go away, and it seems like might it possibly be an election issue, and even after the election, it seems like it's going to be an issue. So on that cheery note of an ongoing like forever war of Liveable Streets, we're ending our show. Thank you everyone for being with us and listening in. Enjoy the weekend. I'm Councillor Puru with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. Thank you everyone for watching the weekly politics show on Relax Radio. Thank you very much. Bye bye.